Firstly, Edmund, thanks so much for agreeing to do the interview. I'll just dive straight into the questions. So in the first gallery, we see a light box. The work is titled 1.98 metres squared. And it's in a configuration that represents a cell at Grendon Prison. The cell is surrounded by pressed flowers. What's your intention here?
Well, using the cell size, or replicating the cell size, is one of the ways of trying to bring the prison environment into the gallery space, and that way it's literally spatially, in other ways it's kind of more material. So just as a starting point, I wanted to create that space for people to engage straight away with that aspect of the experience of incarceration at Grendon. With the flowers, I mean, the use of the flowers came out of a conversation I had with a friend, a colleague, about trying to make work which was shaped by the processes at Grendon and the changes people go through at Grendon. And they said, very simply, have you thought about looking at things which grow within the prison? Which I did. What I think is really interesting about the flowers is the way they're displayed on that light box. You see so much detail. One, you see so much variety. There are so many different species growing there in a place where very little grows. Literally, there are some flower beds, but otherwise all that stuff is flowers, weeds, plants I found around the place. Enormous variety, but also you see so much detail. And the process of pressing the flowers, you know, some of them have rotted, some of them have become incredibly thin and fragile and delicate, and you see that process, you see what has happened to them. And placing them on the light box is a way of referencing the idea of light and visibility, translucency, you know, exposing almost like an X-ray. But also, you know, it's saying there's so many different kinds of things going on, different kinds of species within Grendon, but they're also very beautiful things. Mm-hmm. And part of the beauty is also the process of the rotting and the drying. That becomes part of that process.
So masking prisoners, in this case literally, or obscuring their identity, is seen throughout the exhibition. How have the prisoners reacted to this?
Well, I think the prisoners have reacted to the idea of the mask and using the mask in an artistic context quite easily, because I was very clear what I was trying to do. I was very clear that I wanted to make work which addressed not only the processes that happen at Grendon, but also the idea of visibility. And the fact that I'm not allowed to make work which identifies individual prisoners. That's for obvious reasons of security and anonymity, but it also is a reflection of kind of wider issues around the discourse about crime and the criminal justice system, which is that we don't see prisoners. They are literally not seen. They become indefinite presences when they go into prison. So the masking is part of that exploration of visibility, but also on another level, you know, prisoners talk about the role of the mask in mainstream prisons, about having to have a mask in order to preserve who you are, to kind of send out a message of who you are so that people don't try and exploit you, so that you can kind of establish a place of security for yourself on the kind of hierarchy of power and violence which exists in most prisons. But then the mask is also something which is explored in terms of trying to understand yourself in relation to crime, yourself in relation to who you are and what's going on behind the mask. How do you come out from the mask? Do you wear different masks at different times in response to a reflection of different forms of behaviour? So it's a kind of a metaphor, a symbol which they are pretty familiar with. And then it was also a way of engaging them with the oresteia and the idea of Greek tragedy, where the mask plays a role for the actors. That's something they could then identify with quite readily, I think.
And I guess that follows a similar theme to the pinhole portraits which are displayed in the resource room. Could you tell us about why and how the prisoners have altered those portraits?
Yep. Well, those images, they're made. It's part of that exploration of why I can't show pictures of prisoners. So, I mean, going back to why I used a pinhole camera, it's an early form of technology which has no lens. So there's nothing there to shape or focus the image. So I'm not taking a photograph. Those images are made in a group context where people take it in turns to stand before the camera, and I talk to them and other people in the group, ask them questions about their backgrounds, why they're there, what they've done, what the experience of being there is like. And as they talk, they move around, and over the course of 6 minutes, they create this blurred impression of themselves. So they are images they make of themselves at Grendon. So that reflects, obviously, the process that they're going through in terms of the therapeutic process. But the images are quite troubling. When I first started making them, I thought these are quite ghostly, and so am I just perpetuating the idea of the other and the monster that exists about prisoners? But when I showed the images to the men who made them, when we took them into kind of a group setting, people talked about them, the way they spoke about them reflected ideas of transformation, of them coming to terms with themselves and what they had done and how they thought other people would see them. And those words are really important. So their spoken words or their written words are made part of the work. The words appear in one part of the exhibition, they appear in the artist's book, which I've made. Then some of the men made creative responses. They actually intervened on that image of themselves to transform it further, either by embellishing it or covering it up, or in different forms, writing on it, drawing on it, transforming physically that image of themselves.
So can you tell us about the process of filming the Oresteia, which is seen in the second gallery?
Yes. Okay, I wanted to, I'm moving on from talking about masks, I wanted to make work which partly is kind of shaped by the processes there, and psychodrama is one of the main creative therapies at Grendon. It's also about trying to create work which in some way encourages or engages people enough for them to sort of think differently, to reconfigure how they perceive the representation of the criminal, the prisoner. So I did that by kind of fusing kind of accepted narratives of extreme violence in high culture, high art, for want of a better phrase, represented by the Oresteia, Greek tragedy, to fuse that with the narratives of men who are stigmatised and sort of not seen, dismissed. Because there's a very strong link and similarity between what happens in the Oresteia with one family destroying itself through ambition and revenge, and some of the narratives of the men that have committed crimes who are in Grendon. So I wanted to fuse those two together, and that's also about catharsis. That's about, Greek tragedy is about an audience going through a process of understanding why things happen so they reach a sense of greater understanding. That's essentially what psychodrama is doing as well. The filming of it, practically speaking, involved working with the psychodrama department, with the idea, developing it with them so that we came up with something which they were happy with in terms of representing what they do. It's not psychodrama, but it represents elements of it. And then working with men who had been through the psychodrama process at Grendon. It was a big production to put on in a prison. It involved a lot of collaboration from the security department, getting all the equipment in. We filmed it in the prison gymnasium, kind of the biggest space I could find there. It was a big production. It was an extraordinary event. It's a one-off. Part of the deal of making it was that we couldn't rehearse anything, we couldn't stop anything once it had started, because it's actually a live process for the men who were taking part, who were asked to respond to the characters from the Honest Dyer in terms of being a perpetrator or a victim or a witness. Once that started, we couldn't stop it. So it was just a one-off event that I was able to film, to set up and film. And it took place. It was a very intense experience watching it unfold for everyone involved, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And final question then. Has your work been directly influenced by the prisoners at Grendon, or is it more the institution itself that shaped your work in this exhibition?
It's both. It's definitely both. It's the people I've worked with, it's the nature of the institution and the engagement I was allowed to have with that, that I've been allowed to work there, and being an artist can be disruptive, and in that kind of environment it's clearly quite disruptive. But it's also about, at a higher, wider level, it's also about the Ministry of Justice, it's about notions of criminality and the criminal justice system as well. So it's all those three levels at a kind of, a higher level right down to just the daily or the weekly engagement with the individuals who help shape the work. And clearly, I've tried to make work which is a reflection of, and in a sense is shaped by, the processes that exist at Grendon and and the experiences related to those processes. And that's about visibility, it's about trauma, it's about transformation, and it's about trying to find ways to express those in installational forms, in art forms, in visual forms, which are nuanced enough and interesting enough to engage people, to engage the audiences, without being overtly didactic or overtly banging people on the head and telling them what to think. It's about allowing people through art to engage and find their own way through it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.